Max in Canada, Montreal.
Hey guys, how are you?
Hi, Max.
Pretty good.
Good.
Hey. I really appreciate the bringing in of the Beatles there right at the beginning. It's an awesome thing. Anybody who checks out the Beatles anthology documentary will see that George Harrison actually referred to their constant emphasis on love as a piece of promotion for God. And I was happy that you very honestly did admit that he clearly has changed his opinion as his life has progressed and as he's matured.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I did. I appreciated that, and obviously Beatles are awesome. Great music that I often use, to kind of bring me into the mindset of love, which was, of course, the message of the Messiah. But I just, it's really interesting. This show is pretty new to me. So you'll forgive me if I'm unaware of some of the stances you guys have already expressed repeatedly. And my topic was really about miracles and the many, many miracles that I've seen that are interesting. I'm just curious right off the bat. I'm sure you guys have had callers dealing with this topic before. And what's your general stance on, creative miracles?
Can you
things that,
you define what you mean by a miracle?
Sure. Well, let's talk about miracles of healing, and I'm not talking about pain going away. I'm talking about spontaneous regeneration of tissue.
Before we go into specific examples, can you just give me a general meaning of what a miracle is, according to you?
Absolutely. So a friend of mine who was sick for several...
No.
Not an example, but
definition.
How do you define a miracle as opposed to just something that happens?
Okay, sure. I think Webster's dictionary defines it as basically an occurrence that is surpassing all known laws of reality, shall we say. I mean, I could bring up a specific dictionary definition, but I would say that is a good general one to work from. It's something that's happening that's surpassing all known understandings of physics, shall we say, in cases I've seen biology as well, where you'll see spontaneous regeneration of tissue or, that kind of thing.
Okay, so...
Is that specific enough? Or?
I just want to make sure we're on the same page here, because,
Sure.
I mean, like, when it comes to surpassing all known laws, that you need more than one person applying their knowledge to make that judgment call, right? It can't be just some guy seeing something happen and saying, well, that's more than I know about. Right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so an example of a miracle I've seen. There are many. I'll tell one that was specifically pretty interesting to me because I was an atheist until I began to see an overwhelming amount of these things happen in my life. One of them was a friend of mine who was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome and had basically been placed on an extremely limited diet. She would have horrible issues relating to that. It was pretty well diagnosed. She had a horrible digestive system. And, as reading the Bible and Jesus saying that we would do the same things he's done and greater things in Gospel of John 14:12, I, studying that and realizing that, that's an amazing claim. And if I could see that, that would go an incredible way to begin to be able to testify about the truth. So I commanded her to be healed in the name of Jesus. I put my hand on her stomach, and I commanded her to be healed. And from that day, she was totally healed. And again, this is virtually a brand new digestive system that God gave to her.
This story is about somebody who had irritable bowel syndrome, and then they got better.
And then all symptoms vanished within about a day.
All right. Do you think that this never happens to anybody?
That all symptoms vanish within a day? I would challenge you to give me a case study of that. I don't know.
I'm not a medical guy, but that's why I'm saying that this can't just be one guy's opinion making a snap medical diagnosis when you probably don't have a medical degree. Am I right?
Sure. I mean, I know a lot of doctors, and for all the people that I've mentioned this story to, I've never heard anybody say that this is in any way a common occurrence, or even that it's ever happened. Certainly her own doctor was quite surprised and thought that it was remarkable to the point of...
But being surprised and finding it remarkable isn't the same as saying that it's beyond all known laws of biology. I mean, the fact is that people are sick and sometimes get over it. I don't know the statistical rate of people getting over irritable bowel syndrome. I don't actually even know how bad that is.
It can be fatal. All your viewers should look into that.
But it's not always. I mean, sometimes people recover from that, and it's not a miracle.
I am sure it can happen. There's a lot of amazing natural therapies. Again, we're talking about the speed and the nature of the healing.
The thing about the human body is that it gets better more often than it doesn't. Mm-hmm. I mean, what is the fatality rate of that particular thing anyway?
That's a good question. I think if I were to experience something like that, that's what I would be asking. Is this something that spontaneously gets better? How often? How do you know that it was you praying to Jesus and not something that would have happened anyway? I would question what's the cause and effect here.
I mean, these are very reasonable. I appreciate questions like that too, because if it had just been one occasion where something like this had happened, absolutely coincidence. I mean, the fact that it's happened multiple times, always in conjunction with the specific, teachings of the Bible. That's my own, experience, and that's all obviously I could share. There are many others. People, regeneration of. One girl had scoliosis.
I'm looking on an irritable bowel syndrome self-help and support group, and somebody is asking, what's the death rate? And somebody else is saying, irritable bowel syndrome does not kill or lead to diseases that do. There are other digestive disorders that can, but not irritable bowel syndrome. And then somebody else just says, it's not deadly, it just kind of controls your life at times. Now, these are just some people on the internet. But I'd be willing to throw out a guess that irritable bowel syndrome, even if it sometimes kills people, has at least an 80% survival rate. Is that
absolutely.
Is that
I'm not
fair?
trying to. Sure.
So the
I'm
fact
not
that this
claim
person
that it's,
didn't drop dead from her irritable bowel syndrome isn't that miraculous to me. You know what I mean?
Sure. And again, if it was only that one occasion, these objections might be valid. But of course, it's happened literally. Many times.
Well, if the survival rate was 80%, then I would expect it would happen constantly. I mean, it's not that I'm denying
wait. What would happen
experience
constantly?
here.
That spontaneous healing would happen.
I'm just saying that maybe your bar for miracles is a little bit lower than mine.
Okay, sure. We could talk about that's just one that is interesting to me because it was expensive diagnosed. And I will put a challenge forth, of course. I mean, if you could find somebody whose entire digestive system was totally healed within one day, your objection will again be validated. But it's not.
I don't know that happened because I don't think you're qualified to make that diagnosis.
No, that's why this particular testimony is so compelling, because it had nothing to do with me. It was diagnosed before, and then the complete recovery was also measured. That's why it's really interesting.
Okay.
That's the only kind of thing I would bring up. I wouldn't bring up anything that had not been confirmed by a secondary source.
So she had a doctor's appointment the next day.
Well, she believed, as Yeshua taught, believe and you will receive. Nothing is impossible for those who believe. So she believed it happened, and then she went.
So you know that she regrew her entire digestive system because she told you she really believed it.
Say that again?
Did you get a doctor whose medical examination and diagnosis was she just grew an entire new digestive system in one day?
We're talking about all symptoms spontaneously disappearing.
So no
that's what we're talking about.
So no diagnosis.
Well, all symptoms disappearing. I mean, that's.
And how long before she went to the doctor?
This was within about a week.
Okay, and what did the doctor say about that? Exactly.
I mean, now this seems a little contrived. You obviously know I don't have a transcript of what the doctor said.
Yeah, but you're saying these really, really specific things, like she miraculously grew an entire digestive system in one day, and I don't know that I trust your opinion on that.
I appreciate that. That's totally, I can appreciate the skepticism, but why don't you give me your definition of a miracle? We could work from that.
I'm willing to work with yours. I just think it hasn't been met.
Well, mine hasn't been met. Well, again, I put forth the challenge, and you have not. You're not, in any way answered it. The idea that you could find an occasion of somebody's losing, total reversal of symptoms, and within a week. Let's say I'll give you a week. I mean, if you could find that.
I don't know anyone with irritable bowel syndrome
Okay, so you're
that I
operating from
know of.
complete
So,
ignorance.
I mean, all I'm going
Right.
on is this quick web Google, which said this disease is kind of annoying but not fatal.
Kind of annoying, I think, is an understatement.
Okay.
It certainly
Well,
controls
it
your
did-
life.
it did
And
say
it's a
it
far
does
cry from
sort
the
of
last thing you
control
read,
you.
which said it controls people's lives.
Right.
Kind of annoying is a little bit different from controlling someone's life.
All
But
right.
at any rate, let me
It's
go for
very
your
annoying.
definition of a miracle. You go ahead. I mean, I'm fully willing to
I
to
just
adapt.
said I accept the definition you gave.
Okay, cool. So that is your definition.
Yeah,
okay.
and I think that the example you just gave me wasn't one.
Okay, we could talk about, I could give further, because the point is that this has happened multiple times.
Yeah.
Again, I think it would be foolish. and maybe
That's
you'd
what
agree.
happens with likely things. They happen often.
I'm not talking about irritable bowel syndrome, of course. There are other issues that have been dealt with in the same way.
But if
I'm
your
just
but if
curious.
your standard for miracle isn't sufficient, then I can see it happening multiple times.
Well, you're kind of dodging my question. It seems a little disingenuous here, because I'm asking you what standard you would hold, and you just continue to repeat that my standard has not been met. Obviously, it was met because I'm testifying to it, so I consider it remarkable enough that
Well-
it met my own standard. But what
Well,
about your standard?
it convinced you, but to convince us, what
Exactly,
we're saying
exactly.
is we need more information.
Absolutely respect that position, but could you make it clear to me, since I'm pretty new to the program, and I respect that you have your own measure of it for sure. So what's your measure of?
Well, I
Well,
would,
you could-
I would want to know the answers to the questions Russell was asking. What was the diagnosis? What's the spontaneous recovery rate? Humans have this enormous capacity for confirmation bias. So you do something and something else happens, and we all do it. It's not a criticism. You want to think that the thing you did caused the thing that happened, and so you have to be really careful and examine what's really going on here before you can say, oh, well, this thing caused this other thing.
Right. Okay, so the fact that it just happened to coincide with me saying that prayer, that's kind of the idea that you're maybe suggesting or implying here. It might have just been a coincidence that happened to coincide with me commanding her to be healed.
Right. If 80% of the people with irritable bowel syndrome, and I'm just making this up, spontaneously recover, then I wouldn't think that that's particularly remarkable.
I can guarantee you that 80% do not spontaneously
Let me ask
recover.
you a hypothetical question here. Suppose I found
Sure.
somebody who told me a story that said, I knew somebody with warts.
Yeah.
No, let's not. I mean, let's go with something actually serious. So
Okay.
somebody says to me, I knew somebody with cancer.
Right.
I sincerely and devoutly prayed that the cancer would go away, and
Yeah.
the next day she died.
Wow. Yeah.
What kind of conclusion would you draw from that? Would that tell you anything in particular about the supernatural or the prayer?
Well, I mean, I could ask you the same question about any conventional diagnosis. Obviously, you've given me no information about the person, their stance, their relation to the teachings of the Messiah. So, there's really not enough information. I could twist this question around and ask you,
So
what
you
if I
would
put somebody
say,
on chemo and then the next day they died? I mean, that
guess
doesn't
then
say
you
anything.
would say that maybe it's just a coincidence that they prayed and then the very next day that person died.
Well, I think it's pretty self-evident that not everybody that prays is in the same stance with relation to the teachings of the Messiah. That
Okay,
seems pretty obvious.
so now it's interesting because it seems like you want to support a certain point of view that prayers do magic things. And then when you get a particular example that happens to do the thing that you expect, then you chalk it up to your hypothesis being correct. And and then when it comes to a hypothetical story that does the opposite of what you'd expect, then you just come up with a roundabout way of changing it so that it still matches up with what you wanted to believe in the first place. That's what John was saying about confirmation bias.
Really interesting points, and I don't mean to take away from them, but I do object to the term magical. I actually perceive these things and understand them to be highly advanced technologies that God's made available to us through the teachings that are in there. But that said, I mean, I would just again repeat that the the example that you gave gives really no details about the person's life. I could turn it around and say, I mean, do you guys believe in, let's say, conventional treatments for cancer, the efficacy of chemotherapy or different types of drugs? If you believe in that, you'd have to know what kind of cancer. You'd have to know what the person, what were they doing that day?
Yeah,
I mean, were they
do.
Things that were aggravated? It's really disingenuous because on the other side, even your own beliefs couldn't necessarily answer that. Could you answer
why I believe that conventional treatments for cancer are effective?
Well, I'm just saying the exact application of your own hypothetical without any other details, it would be kind of foolish to answer that. I mean, I understand maybe in your mind
then here's an idea.
Yeah.
If you want to subject this idea that prayer cures things to the same standards that conventional therapy is also held to, then what you could do is you could come up with some very rigorous and detailed tests so that you wouldn't rely on one person's anecdote about how one person prayed and then another person got healed and that's a miracle.
Sure.
You could set up studies, in careful ways so that you have a lot of people praying and a lot of people being prayed for, and you could see whether the rate of survival or being cured gets better than people who are not prayed for. Would that, I mean, that sort of thing would be helpful?
It's interesting. I don't have maybe the same level of faith in the current framework of science that's there, because I know there are many...
I'm not talking about faith. I'm just saying that your standards should be a little higher than taking one incident and insisting that it can't be just...
Sure. I didn't mean to say faith. Maybe you object to that. Maybe confidence, let's say, that, because there are, of course, a number of effective cancer therapies that are actively ignored by science now. And we don't even need to go to the supernatural. You could talk about natural treatments and everything like that are already being ignored. But, it's interesting to me. You guys have obviously heard other testimonies like this. If there's anybody with, of true faith that's walking in the truth that's calling into this show, and they're not just religious, confused zealots, looking to argue. I'm just curious, in general, you must have heard other testimonies like this. What's your... I've heard other atheists say, they believe it could have something to do with the power of the mind or potentially
it may be pithy, but the plural of evidence is, or the plural of anecdote is not data.
Okay.
What I mean is, sometimes people get better, sometimes they don't. But in all the millions and millions of sickness cases that happen in the world every day, taking one individual story and saying that is representative of a cause and effect isn't good enough.
Yeah, and you have to be really careful, because there's a lot of people with a lot of medical conditions who are being prayed over by their loved ones. How many of them don't ever get better? You see the success, but you don't see the misses. You see the hits, but you don't see the misses. And in fact, there have been several controlled, really well done studies about the efficacy of prayer, and nothing has ever shown up to be significant in controlled studies. So what that tells me is that, some people get, like Russell said, some people get better, some people don't get better, and the prayer or lack of prayer doesn't seem to be the controlling factor.
Well, we're already off base because, Yeshua gave us authority to command healing. It's different from prayer, which is actually asking God to heal. There is a difference. If you read the accounts in the Gospel, remember I approached this scientifically.
No,
so I
you
do
didn't.
Look at the details. I do look at the
seriously,
detailed approach.
you didn't approach it scientifically. And I'd love to talk to you more, but I think we're down to 10 minutes in the show, and I think I'm.
You guys are very generous. Thanks for your time. I appreciate.
All right, thank you very much. Feel free to call again.
Okay, later,
Bye,
guys.
Max.
Thanks, Max.